Welcome everyone, Christine here with a discussion about Empire in Total War Warhammer 3 for both Immortal Empires and Realms of Chaos. So honestly, at this point, I think they should completely abandon Realms of Chaos. If they want to add the narrative campaign, and I'm not against it, they should just add it as a toggle for Immortal Empires. Like, let's say you're playing an Imperial campaign in the DLC that's going to come out in this winter. That's going to include Nurgle, likely Tamarkun, and also going to include the dwarves. If there's a narrative campaign involving that, it should be included in Mortal Empires as a toggle. Like, you could start in Mortal Empires as a pure sandbox, or you could start it in a narrative mode in that campaign. You're just adding the objectives. Nothing else should change with respect to that. Maybe, obviously the rogue armies, if we look at what they did with the cast dwarves. But anyway, who they could add as a legendary lord in that campaign? Well, for Nurgle, it's likely going to be Tamarkun. That makes the most amount of sense. Though they do interestingly have the Nemesis crown as well. The Nemesis crown was an event. It wasn't necessarily very well documented. For the dwarves, it could be Joseph Bugman. We'll see who they're going to add as a legendary lord. But for Nuln, I personally really hope that who they decide to add is actually Valten. That would be my personal choice with the legendary hero of Luthor Huss. But if they decide not to go with that, the other choice, the one that people have been talking about, would be the Electric Countess of Nuln, along with the Dark Lady of Nuln as a legendary hero. Though I don't necessarily think that the Electric Countess of Nuln would make a lot of sense, because she's more of a support character. Though it would be interesting having a campaign where you have the faction leader being someone that you don't actually control on the campaign map, because that's how the Electric Countess of Nuln is. She's not a fighter herself, she supports fighters, so that would probably be an interesting situation. Kind of like how you could have Fenubar as the leader of Lothern, and Tyrion actually is the legendary lord in practice on the battlefield. Just a perspective on that matter. I think that could be an interesting situation. I mean, we've had... we already kind of have this situation where, let's say you're playing as Isabella, right? Well, Vlad is still the faction leader. The guy who shows up in charge of it is just Isabella as the legendary lord there. But we'll see what Creative Assembly decides to do with the Empire. For dwarves, maybe Joseph Bugman. Though it would be awkward to have Joseph Bugman as a legendary lord added, because rangers are already in the game, including his rangers as part of Belegar's campaign. Maybe they could give you a second option to get rangers if you buy the DLC. Just an idea, but I'll talk about the dwarves in a separate video. But what does the Empire need? A whole lot. First off, let's talk about the campaign mechanics. We have Imperial Authority, Books on a Gash, as well as the hostility meter for Marcus Wolfhard. When we're looking at the Books on a Gash, better ways of being able to acquire them would be very much needed. Being able to acquire them from diplomacy would be very much needed, as opposed to you just always having to do a smash and grab. It is annoying in a Tomb King's campaign. Imagine playing as Volkmar having to invade Ulthuan. That is a fun experience, I gotta tell you. So that's what I would change in Volkmar's campaign. I would also just give him a better starting situation, because, like, Suddenberg just sucks. Because the port sucks. Just having a port obviously limits your economic potential. Yes, you can recruit, tier 2 units from the very start, or from very early on. Yes, that is an advantage, but your early game economy is limited, and you don't have an easy early game situation either. For Marcus Wolfhard, well, Marcus Wolfhard, I feel he should have a lot more climate types available in his campaign. It is ridiculous that he does not do so. Like, he is supposed to be he's supposed to be leading a band of survivalists, basically, and yet it's like he's very, very limited by climate in his campaign. I mean, sure, you could conquer Ulthuan, you can conquer all of Lustria and the Southlands if you're playing as Marcus Wolfhard, but beyond that, you don't actually have as many terrain options as you might think. I do think he can take all of Ulthuan, though. Enjoy doing that in a campaign, because the elves are just much better than the Empire. The thing that's annoying in Marcus Wolfhard's campaign is constantly playing with negative control. Yes, you can use mods for it, sure. But it is always still annoying. And then on top of that, while you certainly get a lot of benefits in this campaign as Marcus Wolfhard from all the units, you're going to get, like, you can get things like Hellstorm rocket batteries, like, within 10 turns, 20 turns, let's say, of a campaign. That is absurdly powerful. And you're not just getting that once, you're going to keep getting them. Like, within 30 turns, you're looking at steam tanks and all that good stuff. So you can get some really, really, really good units in this campaign. That's great, but you're constantly being annoyed by the mechanics that you also have to play with in this particular campaign. Specifically, the fact that you're constantly going to get a doomed stack of lizardmen to spawn just to screw with you. And I think I would remove that situation in his campaign. Just do it in a different way, because right now it just makes his campaign, like, he is, like, Marcus Wolfhard is both the most powerful legendary lord for the Empire at the moment, but he's also the most miserable campaign to play as well. And that's saying something, because the other Imperial campaigns are not exactly great either. For the Empire, Imperial authority needs to go in the garbage. Or you need to start with a positive Imperial authority and have a reason to give a shit about the state of the Empire. Different mods have done different things on this subject. There is a mod that allows you to, 1, use prestige to buy Imperial authority, and 2, also allows you to use prestige to get defensive alliances and military alliances with that. Another mod that reworks the Empire, what it does is it gives you benefits to having positive, very positive, up to plus 15 Imperial authority and getting a lot of income, a lot of faction-wide benefits. Also ties the Elector State Troopers to that positive Imperial authority. It ties it to Imperial authority in a positive way, because basically the pool of Elector Count State Troops in that mod, the way it works is like there's a chance it can be filled up. The chance increases the more fealty you have with the faction, the better relations you have with the faction, the more Imperial authority you have, the more troops you're going to get in the pool. And you can also, and more diplomatic options are available, the more fealty you have with the particular Imperial faction. Though I would certainly lower the fealty thresholds compared to what that mod requires. Because, for instance, in order to get the military alliance, you need a fealty plus 8, which isn't a great situation, but it is an idea. But it isn't a great situation because you're still going to be so very limited in a campaign. Like, say, for instance, if you're playing the Empire, obviously you want to march in Midland to go help them out. So I think that and not being able to get, say, for instance, a military access unless you have a positive fealty with the faction is pretty damn annoying. So that mod in some ways makes the early game worse. And this is the thing that I want to emphasize right now, and this has been a case in Total War games for quite a while now. The early game is the thing that matters the most. I don't give a crap how good a faction can be in the late game, because that's not relevant. How good is a faction within the first 30 turns? If I'm playing High Elves, Dark Elves, Chaos Dwarves, etc., and Chaos Dwarves are a great example, because it's not like Chaos Dwarves get all their toys to play from turn 1, but they're still a really good faction early on. If I'm playing a faction, I want to have a lot of good early game options. Obviously, for any faction, the most amount of power should come when you build up a proper empire, but how well they do early on is just as important. High Elves, Greenskins, Dark Elves, many others, they do it very well within those 30 turns. To understand how well I'm talking about, if I'm playing a campaign as Morathi, I can conquer Lothern within 30 or so turns in a campaign without actually sending Morathi to Ulthuan. You might wonder how I manage it, but it's like I spend much of my early game building a second army and a Black Ark force, and so I'm building 2 full stacks, while Morathi with a full stack is conquering territory north, selling it to Mazda Mundi. So I'm building 2 entire armies. I sail them past Calador and everything like that, just attack Lothern. Tyrion tries to counterattack. Tyrion fails. And all of Ulthuan basically belongs to Morathi after that point. But that's a specific campaign situation. The Empire is the worst, one of the worst factions in the early game. Late game, yes. Late game, when you start getting When you start getting Hellstorms, when you start getting Great Cannons, when you get Demigryphs, when you get Huntsmen, Dark Huntsmen, and there's a bit of a bug here because of mod, because apparently I can recruit Dark Shots. What did the world happen? Like, just a mod conflict, I think, over here. But when you get Great Swords, Huntsmen, Artillery, Cavalry, yeah, the Empire is pretty decent. But that's the thing. They're just decent compared to factions that have a similar level of strength from the very first turn of their campaign. I mean, look at Warriors of Chaos. They can get a Hell Cannon, like the Undivided ones get a freaking Hell Cannon from turn 1. I mean, sure, it's going to take them a lot longer than that to get the second one, but they can actually get the second Hell Cannon before the Empire, most Imperial factions can get a Great Cannon in their campaign. This is one of the reasons why I actually rated the Empire as not being a great artillery faction, because it's, the artillery options are great. Options don't matter if you can't actually use them in a campaign until that campaign is effectively over. Like, sure, if you're playing Marcus Wolfhard, you'll get access to the great artillery options, but the point I'm making here, what the Empire needs is a much better early game situation. I see absolutely no freaking reason why the Empire couldn't have a tier 2 artillery gunsmith that gives them access to cannons, for instance. Cannons are so important in particular because they are important in sieges. Guess what we're going to have to deal with? A lot of fucking sieges. Hellstorms, and like what we get at tier 3 is mortars. Mortars which the AI can dodge so very easily. Mortars which are useless in a siege at breaking down walls and wall towers. That's the reason they're so important, because you need to have that kind of flexibility in a campaign. Kislev has this issue. The thing is, Kislev has a much better early game army than the Empire does. Kislev has a lot of major problems in their campaign, but I would rather play Kislev at the moment than play the Empire, and that's saying something considering the weakness that Kislev has in their campaign. A lot of weaknesses. I mean, Kislev gets tier 2 replenishment. You have to wait until tier 3. The Imperial, like, look at the Empire. Until tier 3, what are you getting as a unit roster? Garbage. Absolute garbage. The only decent units that you can recruit until tier 3 are archers and crossbowmen. And for a front line, you get some spearmen shields, but anyone's going to chew for them very, very quickly. Like, these guys will not stand up and fight. You don't have any good infantry options to deal damage until tier 3, and even then, the great swords are not going to stand up to many units from other races. Like, consider great swords against nasty skulkers in a campaign. Keep in mind this, in a campaign scenario, not a skirmish scenario, in a campaign scenario. Because in a campaign, if you're playing the greenskins, you get a lot of advantages towards those nasty skulkers. And yeah, nasty skulkers certainly are one of the best early game units in the game right now. But you want to talk about tier 3 units for the greenskins? Like, we can talk about trolls that they get at tier 2, and trolls would actually win that engagement. Lots of problems. Also, I find it sad that the Empire halberdiers have always been awful to use in a campaign situation, when the Empire front line should probably be made up by a lot of halberdiers from a lore perspective. The issue is these units are just too weak in melee combat. They're so pathetic that even Bretonnia can actually compare them. But Bretonnia is one of the most pathetic factions in the world. Like, I saw Mark of Chaos do the Empire much better than Total War ever did. Like, the unit roster that the Empire has early on in a campaign is just freaking pathetic. The cavalry is good, sure, but cavalry obviously is limited in sieges in particular. Like, Imperial Knights are pretty heavily armored, pretty good stats, absolutely, relatively decent in terms of cost. And obviously at tier 3, once you get there, Huntsman, great swords, and keep in mind we're talking DLC units here as well. But when you start thinking about Huntsman, great swords, and you start looking at Outriders, grenade launchers, and Knights, and I really get annoyed by how whenever I move here, it always tells me like I need how it's always shifting at the barracks, and it's just like really, really, really irritating. But yeah, lots and lots of problems with the Imperial roster. Their early game roster is too weak. And while the Empire certainly has a decent amount of growth, decent enough economy, compared to, say, the dwarves, like the dwarves pay so much more for their main economic building, it isn't even funny. While the Empire certainly has that going for it, it's not going to suffer from that perspective. Just the units available are not that great. Nor are the lords. Nor are the generic lords. Like, consider General of the Empire, right? Look at the General of the Empire. He's got no special... he's got no choice of customization. And a captain is in the same boat as well. No special skill line over here, no choice. And while they're decent as a fighter, they're not great. Huntsmen, general, are better in this respect because they do have a special skill line. Archlectors are great, are better because of the spells they can, well, not the spells, but you get the abilities that they can use, sure, but they all have their limitations, as do the heroes of the Empire. The heroes need to be improved. They need to get those special skill lines available to them, especially captains, which are pretty damn pathetic in a campaign. Same with witch hunters. Like, we also need an improvement when it comes to... A major improvement that needs to happen is that range lords, heroes, need to actually be effective in a battle. And this is a general issue. It's not just an Imperial issue. It's an issue Alifanar has. It's like, yeah, if they get the shot off in once or twice in a battle, sure, they'll do a lot of damage with that. But overall, their DPS, because they struggle to shoot effectively, they're not necessarily as accurate as you might expect them to be. Like, if they can constantly shoot an enemy, sure, they'll do damage. The problem is they struggle to get those shots off, as do many ranged units in general in the game, is a major issue to tackle. And really, as it currently stands in the game, if you're playing an Imperial faction, if you're playing as Karl Franz or Balthazar Gelt, you're not playing to defend the Empire. This is the most ridiculous problem in a campaign, right? You need the Imperial authority. Well, there's a mod that adds a bunch of early game objectives, like, hey, if you're taking Helmgart over here, you're going to get some Imperial authority. Maybe if you're playing Karl Franz, you should start with at least Helmgart, and just the secessionists should just control these territories over here, because it is pretty annoying to have to spend the first few turns of your campaign just pacifying this province. But what's most annoying is right now, and even with mods, this issue does not necessarily go away. Though mods can make it more punishing to do, it's still worth doing. You need early game Imperial authority. You're going to obviously lose Imperial authority the more Elector counts go down. So Ostermark and Hochland are always going to be wiped out. You can't prevent it. Ostermark is going to be wiped out because of Draika and Azak. Hochland's going to be wiped out by Festens. Mindenland is going to survive, but it is probably just going to be down to Karaburg over here. And Stirland and Averheim are also under threat. And who knows, maybe Durfa does decide to pay a visit to Nuln. Who knows? But you need Imperial authority because obviously you're getting if you let the Elector counts go into civil war, if you let the Elector counts collapse completely, you're going to lose a lot of Imperial authority and get a civil war. But here's the thing. It is much better in a campaign to declare war on Nuln, wipe out their army, get a lot of experience and money from doing so. Yes, you will suffer a lot of Imperial authority losses, but you just sack it and then move on. And then you take this particular settlement, Wizardburg, and then you constantly sell back and forth between yourself and Ardergelt or Averheim for like the first 20-30 turns of a campaign. After that, you take Nuln directly as a settlement. You just get so much Imperial authority that you're going to be able to confederate all the other factions, and you're not going to suffer from the constant loss of Imperial authority. Eventually, you take Nuln, you build a landmark there, and that's what you do for the first 20-30 fucking turns of a campaign as Karl Franz and Balthazar Gelt. If that doesn't sound fun to you and sounds completely awful, it's because it is. It's not a fun campaign situation, it's not fun to do, it's not fun to engage with that particular system, as I see it. They need to prevent that from being the best decision in an Imperial campaign. If that's the best possible choice we have in a campaign, then the campaign design is freaking awful. And if they add the Nuln as a faction in the game, Like, if they add a Legendary Lord for Nuln, then what they need to do is prevent the best choice for Nuln from being to do the same shit that Karl Franz and Geld do to Nuln right now, but just do it to Stirland. Because that would not be a great situation. Like, if they add a Legendary Lord for Nuln, and let's say you have to take control over these 2 settlements, and then you have to deal with everything else, including Imperial Authority as it is right now, I'll tell you what I'll be doing. I'll be going for Flensburg, wiping Stirland's army in the process, taking over the settlement, and then trading it to either Karl Franz or Talabecland, getting Imperial fealty with them, then getting the event where you can force them to give it back at the cost of fealty, because that's the trick, right? If you get the event and you force them to give it back, you're gonna get a bit of you're gonna get 1 Imperial authority. It is such a stupid system at the moment. We've seen with the Chaos Dwarves how you can have a political dimension to a faction where you care about the well-being of the entire race, and it actually makes sense. Like, the way the Tower of Tsar works is a much, much better system than this bullshit meter. That's where I stand on that subject. And the roster does need to be buffed, or certain units like Greatswords, Huntsmen need to be available earlier on. They shouldn't be tier 3 units. You should be able to acquire them earlier on. Same with Great Cannons and Hellstorm rocket batteries. And also screw mortars, really. Maybe make mortars a tier 1 artillery unit. What's the harm in that? Costine signing out. Don't forget to subscribe, like, enable notifications, and stay tuned for more.